The first sign that your life is preparing to shift often arrives not through external events, but through a subtle yet profound discomfort with who you have been. The structures that once held your identity begin to loosen, and the ground beneath the image you have carefully constructed starts to crack. This is not a failure of self. It is a sacred unraveling. The persona, the face you wear for the world, which was once a useful tool, begins to feel like a mask that no longer fits. The ego, with all its roles, its need for certainty, its attachment to praise and avoidance of shame, starts to tremble under the weight of a deeper truth rising from within. At first, this sensation is quiet, a vague feeling of restlessness, of not belonging in your own life, even when everything appears fine on the surface. You may find yourself questioning your job, your relationships, your routines. You wonder why things that used to excite you now feel hollow. This is not because something is wrong with the world. It is because something old within you is dying. The ego, having served its purpose for a season, senses its limitations and resists its own diminishment. It clings to the familiar even as the psyche longs to grow beyond it. This creates an inner tension, a psychological crucible, where the false begins to melt and the true has not yet fully taken form. You may feel fragmented, disoriented, unable to fully commit to the life you've known. What you're experiencing is the psyche's refusal to continue playing roles that were once adaptive but are now oppressive. The teacher, the parent, the achiever, the helper, the rebel. Whatever identity you've been wearing starts to feel like clothing that belonged to another time. And in many ways it did. Your persona was built from past experience, social conditioning, cultural influence, and psychological survival. But the self, the deeper self, cannot be confined to these limited expressions forever. When growth is near, the inner world begins to revolt against falsity. This revolt often appears as confusion. You may feel uncertain about what you want, unclear about who you are becoming, and ashamed for feeling lost in the very life you once worked so hard to build. But confusion is not weakness, it is transition. You are not broken, you are breaking open. The shell of your former identity, rigid and too small, begins to crack to allow something larger, more expansive, and more real to emerge. This is not the breakdown of the self, but the breakdown of the ego's illusion of completeness. Old ambitions may begin to feel meaningless. Goals that once gave you direction lose their power to inspire. The psyche begins to strip you of the artificial metrics of success, forcing you to confront the uncomfortable truth that fulfillment does not arise from external achievement, but from internal alignment. This stripping away can feel like loss, and indeed it is a form of mourning. You grieve not only the dreams that no longer speak to you, but also the image of yourself you once tried so hard to protect. You grieve the version of you who tried to be everything to everyone, who chased approval, who feared rejection, who confused productivity for worth. In this disintegration of ego and persona, the unconscious begins to emerge with greater force. Dreams become more vivid, intuition sharper, and emotions more intense. The inner world demands attention. This is not coincidence. The psyche is pulling you inward, away from the surface, so that you may remember something forgotten. The truth of who you are beneath the mask. This stage of internal collapse is also a reorientation. As one version of you falls away, a deeper self stirs beneath the ruins, whispering in symbols and sensations that point the way toward authenticity. What complicates this transition is that the outer world often does not recognize it. People around you may expect you to remain who you were, to continue playing roles you no longer resonate with. This external pressure only deepens the divide between your outer life and your inner truth. But the psyche does not conform to societal timelines. It does not care for convenience or approval. It moves according to its own ancient rhythm, one that prioritizes wholeness over comfort. You may try to resist this shift by doubling down on old patterns, numbing through distraction, or pretending all is well, but eventually the weight of inauthenticity becomes unbearable. Resistance turns into exhaustion. Exhaustion turns into surrender. And in that surrender, the ego begins to soften. For the first time, you allow yourself to admit what no longer works. You give yourself permission to stop performing. You let go of who you think you should be and begin listening for the faint sound of who you truly are. This listening is the beginning of transformation. It is not loud. It does not come with certainty. It arrives quietly, like a memory you almost forgot, like a dream returning at dawn. And once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. The old self no longer satisfies. The old mask no longer comforts. Something deep within you is waking up, not to create a new persona, but to reclaim the original essence that lived beneath the mask all along. When the psyche begins to prepare for a transformation, the outer world starts to shimmer with meaning. What once seemed random, coincidental, or trivial now begins to form patterns, as if life itself is whispering in code. These patterns are not of the rational mind's making. They do not emerge from linear logic or deliberate thought. They come from a deeper source, the unconscious, which speaks not in facts but in symbols. This symbolic language is what gives birth to synchronicity, a phenomenon in which two seemingly unrelated events occur together in a way that is too meaningful to be dismissed as chance. As your inner world begins to shift, you may notice certain symbols repeating in your environment, a specific number that appears again and again, a dream animal that later shows up in a book or a conversation, a phrase that finds its way to you through strangers and songs and headlines. These are not accidents. They are messages from the unconscious, rising into the field of your awareness to help guide you toward your next stage of growth. When your life is about to change, reality bends to reflect that inner stirring. The world becomes a mirror, not of your ego's desires, but of your soul's journey. This symbolic guidance emerges most clearly when the ego begins to loosen its grip. When your conscious mind is distracted or fatigued, the unconscious finds its opportunity. It reveals itself not through loud declarations, but through dreams, visions, passing feelings, strange encounters, and fleeting thoughts that seem to carry unusual weight. It is not uncommon, in such times, to feel as though the universe is conspiring to speak to you. And in a way, it is not the external universe as object, but the inner universe projected onto the outer world. The psyche externalizes its needs through synchronicity, shaping your perceptions and experiences in ways that reveal what your intellect has not yet grasped. You may find that your dreams grow more vivid, more emotionally charged, more archetypal. You may dream of death, not in the literal sense, but as a symbol of an old part of you falling away. You may dream of water, the deep unconscious, or of rebirth, of journeys, of mysterious guides. These are not just dreams, they are the soul's way of preparing you. They bring unconscious material to the surface, not for the sake of entertainment, but for integration. You are being shown what lies beneath your awareness so that you can meet it consciously and allow it to shape your evolution. In waking life too, you may find yourself drawn to certain books, films, or conversations that feel strangely aligned with your inner state. You may meet someone who speaks exactly the words you needed to hear, without knowing anything about your struggle. A quote may land in your path like a signpost. A line in a song may echo a question you've been silently asking. These are synchronistic moments, and they have a quality of sacredness to them. Not because they are magical in the childish sense, but because they dissolve the illusion of separateness between the inner and outer worlds. The psyche uses these moments to communicate across the veil. There is a deep intelligence in this symbolic orchestration. It does not follow the laws of the material world, yet it emerges through it. To the rational mind, it feels unsettling, because it suggests that not everything can be explained. But to the intuitive soul, it feels like home, because it affirms that everything is connected. When your life is about to change, the ordinary becomes extraordinary. The world becomes alive with significance. And that is because your perception itself is being recalibrated. The shift is not only in your circumstances, but in your consciousness. These moments are invitations. They do not force, they beckon. The psyche is not a tyrant, it is a guide. And its guidance is never linear. It does not say, go here and do this. Instead, it plants seeds, images, intuitions, synchronicities, and waits to see what you will do with them. You may choose to ignore them, to write them off as coincidence. But if you pay attention, if you allow yourself to be moved by the invisible threads weaving your experiences together, you will begin to realize that you are being prepared for something deeper than a mere change of plans. You are being initiated. Initiation is not taught, it is revealed. And the revelation often begins through symbols. Symbols carry layers of meaning beyond what words can define. They open the door to mystery. They allow the unconscious to speak without censorship. When you begin to notice symbols appearing more frequently in your life, especially those that stir something within you, it is a sign that your psyche is active, that your inner world is awakening in response to a coming transformation. To recognize this symbolic layer requires stillness. It requires stepping out of the habitual and into the poetic. The ego thrives on noise, distraction, and logic. The unconscious moves in silence, depth, and metaphor. As your life prepares to change, the invitation will not come as a clear set of instructions. It will come as a pattern you can't ignore, a sensation you can't shake, a dream that won't leave you alone, a symbol that stirs you without explanation. These are not fragments of chance. They are the architecture of change being revealed to you in real time. The psyche speaks in image, and those images become the map that leads you through the unknown. When the unconscious begins to signal a major transformation, it does so not only through symbols and dreams, but also through the emergence of raw, unfiltered emotion. This emotional turbulence is often misunderstood, feared, or repressed. Yet it is one of the clearest signs that something profound is stirring beneath the surface of your psyche. Before a great shift, the old emotional structures, the ones built to guard the fragile ego, begin to dissolve. In their place, a flood rises. It brings with it everything that has been buried, denied, avoided, or anesthetized for years, sometimes even decades. You may feel overwhelmed, volatile, or inexplicably sensitive. These are not symptoms of failure. They are signs that your psychic system is purging itself in preparation for a deeper integration. This process often begins with anxiety or a sense of being off, a vague internal dissonance that cannot be rationalized or traced to a specific cause. You feel a tightening in the chest, a sense of agitation, perhaps a need to cry without knowing why. This is the unconscious preparing you for a confrontation with aspects of yourself that have remained hidden or dormant. And like anything buried, when it begins to rise, it does so with pressure. These intense emotional states are eruptions from the deep mind. They are not random fluctuations, they are revelations. You may begin to revisit old memories, not just intellectually, but somatically. Emotions you thought were long resolved begin to return, not to torment you, but to complete a process that was never allowed to finish. Childhood wounds, betrayals, griefs, and longings, all the emotional imprints that formed the architecture of your ego begin to resurface, because your psyche knows that they cannot accompany you into what comes next. Repressed material does not disappear, it waits. It waits until the system is strong enough to face it. And when a life shift is near, the system is being ready to heal. What makes this stage of transformation so difficult is that it feels regressive. You might wonder why you are going backwards, why old fears or patterns are re-emerging. But healing is not linear. The psyche moves in cycles, spirals, returns. What rises again is not coming back to harm you, it is coming back to be redeemed. These emotional surges are the body's way of finally metabolizing experiences that were previously too overwhelming to process. It is the unconscious trusting that you are now capable of digesting what once had to be suppressed in order for you to survive. Tears may flow without warning. Rage may erupt seemingly out of nowhere. You may feel deep sorrow, a kind of melancholic pull toward the core of your being. These are not weaknesses. These are the tremors that precede rebirth. Before the psyche allows a new self to emerge, it demands that the old emotional residue be cleared. Just as the body purges toxins in a state of fever, so too does the psyche purge emotional toxins in a state of heightened feeling. And just as fever can be mistaken for illness, so too can emotional release be mistaken for dysfunction. But it is a healing crisis, painful, yes, but purposeful. During this time, it is not uncommon to feel isolated. Others may not understand what you are going through. They may urge you to cheer up or move on, not realizing that you are undergoing a kind of inner initiation that does not adhere to surface-level fixes. Emotional turbulence cannot be bypassed, only honored. And in honoring it, in allowing the storm to rise without trying to suppress or numb it, you enter into deeper communion with your unconscious. You begin to develop a relationship with the forgotten self, the shadow, the hidden archetypes that dwell in your depths. This emotional upheaval may also coincide with physical symptoms: fatigue, insomnia, restlessness, tightness in the body. The psyche is not separate from the soma. What the unconscious stirs emotionally, the body reflects physically. If you listen carefully, the body becomes a map of what is rising from within. A tight throat may speak of unspoken truths. A heavy chest may carry old grief. A tense jaw may hold years of repressed rage. Each sensation is a signal, a message, a piece of the puzzle that the deeper mind is assembling. As this process continues, you may begin to see the contours of your old emotional patterns more clearly. You realize how you have used control to avoid vulnerability, how you have used business to avoid sadness, how you have used performance to gain love. These insights do not come as intellectual analysis, but as felt revelations, moments when the full weight of your emotional history lands in your awareness with breathtaking clarity. These are the moments that crack the ego open. They are not always beautiful, but they are always sacred. There is also a stripping away of emotional illusions, fantasies about who you were supposed to be, who others were supposed to be, what life was supposed to give you. These begin to fall apart. This disillusionment is painful, but necessary. It clears the path for a deeper form of truth, one not rooted in projection or longing, but in reality. And from that reality, new emotional currents can emerge, not ones based in reactivity or fear, but ones based in grounded, conscious feeling. The emotional storm gives way eventually to emotional depth. To experience this full range of emotion is not to lose yourself. It is to find yourself more completely. Every feeling that rises is a fragment of self, returning home. The sadness is a younger you needing to be held. The anger is a part of you that was silenced, now finding its voice. The fear is an instinct long ignored, now insisting on being heard. When you feel deeply, you live authentically. And when the psyche begins to clear space for a new life, it always begins by awakening the parts of you that were long asleep. When life prepares to turn in a new direction, one of the most startling phenomena is the collapse of meaning. What once provided a sense of certainty, roles, routines, identities, beliefs, begins to unravel. This experience, often misunderstood as depression or existential crisis, is actually a profound signal from the psyche. It is not a breakdown in the pathological sense, but a breaking open of the constructed self. The forms through which you previously understood your place in the world no longer suffice. They feel brittle, hollow, or false. This does not mean you are lost. It means you are being asked to find a deeper, more authentic alignment with your inner truth. The ego resists this disintegration. It clings to the known, to structure, to titles and external validation. But the soul does not thrive in imitation. It grows through confrontation with the real. When your life is about to change, you may find yourself unable to tolerate what once seemed acceptable. The career that once felt purposeful now feels mechanical. The relationship that once felt secure now feels suffocating. The goals that once energized you now feel strangely empty. This is not failure. This is the psyche stripping away the illusions that kept you bound to an identity that has outlived its purpose. In this space between who you were and who you are becoming, disorientation is inevitable. You are no longer who you were, but you are not yet who you are meant to be. The symbolic skin is shedding, and beneath it is a rawness that exposes you to the mystery of existence. This liminal space is where transformation begins. It is a place of uncertainty, but also of profound potential. You may feel like nothing makes sense anymore, but it is in this collapse of meaning that new meaning can be born. Not imposed from the outside, but discovered from within. The psyche is wise. It dismantles false structures only when the self is ready to encounter something more honest. That readiness is often experienced as exhaustion, a spiritual fatigue that comes from maintaining a facade. You may feel as though you can no longer pretend, perform, or conform. This wariness is not a sign of weakness. It is the soul demanding truth. In this state, many people try to distract themselves. They return to habits, addictions, or superficial pleasures in an attempt to avoid the void. But the void is not an enemy. It is a sacred space where the soul's voice grows louder. During this period, silence becomes a mirror. In the absence of external distractions, you begin to hear the deeper questions: who am I when no one is watching? What do I truly want? What is calling to me beyond ambition, beyond fear, beyond conditioning? These questions emerge not from the intellect, but from the depths of being. They are not answered in words, but in shifts of perception, in moments of clarity that pierce through the fog of doubt. This collapse of former meaning can feel like a kind of death, and in a way, it is a death of the false self, of the borrowed identities that once kept you safe but now keep you stuck. The psyche does not destroy without purpose. It breaks down the old to make space for the new. But unlike superficial change, which rearranges the outer life while leaving the inner world untouched, this type of shift begins within and radiates outward. You do not simply change jobs or relationships, you change the way you relate to existence itself. As you move through this threshold, old narratives begin to dissolve. Stories you told yourself, about your limitations, about what is possible, about what you must do to be loved, begin to sound like echoes from someone else's life. This can be terrifying because the ego fears annihilation, but the deeper you, the one who has been watching and waiting behind the masks, begins to stir. You feel it not as an idea but as a quiet inner knowing, a pull towards something undefined yet deeply familiar. That is the soul reclaiming its voice. In these moments, solitude becomes sacred. It is in the quiet that you begin to rebuild, not from templates but from essence. You rediscover forgotten passions, unexplored desires, neglected values. You find yourself drawn to simplicity, to authenticity, to depth. You no longer crave approval in the way you once did. You no longer tolerate what is in conflict with your truth. This is not rebellion, it is realignment. You are not becoming someone else. You are returning to who you were before the world told you who to be. Alongside this stripping away, the psyche also begins to reconfigure your inner architecture. New insights arise, seemingly out of nowhere. You begin to see your past differently, to reinterpret your struggles as preparation. Pain becomes teacher. Loneliness becomes portal. What once felt like punishment is now seen as initiation. This new vision is not forced. It emerges organically when you stop trying to hold together the life that no longer fits. The new self cannot emerge while the old self is still pretending to be alive. The collapse of meaning is therefore not a sign of mental collapse, but of psychic growth. The very structures that are falling apart were the ones keeping you from your wholeness. When they fall, it is because you are ready to see with different eyes. And from those new eyes, the world reveals itself not as a set of rules but as a canvas. You no longer live by obligation, but by orientation to inner truth. This is the space where transformation becomes possible, where new choices emerge, not from fear but from clarity. The shift in your outer world begins with a tectonic movement in your inner landscape, where false meaning dissolves so that authentic purpose can rise. When your life is about to change in ways that transcend the ordinary, the psyche does not always whisper. It often disturbs. One of the final and most unmistakable signs of impending transformation is the breakdown of linear time within your experience. What you once viewed as a clear progression of past, present, and future begins to fragment. Instead, time bends inward. You begin to encounter synchronicities, strange moments of alignment that cannot be explained by cause and effect. They appear as symbols, numbers, repeated images, dreams that echo waking life, or chance meetings that seem impossibly precise. These are not coincidences. They are communications from the unconscious, signals that your inner world and the outer world are drawing closer together in preparation for a shift. At this stage, the psyche becomes permeable. The wall between conscious awareness and the unconscious becomes thinner. You find yourself caught in flashes of insight, déjà vu, or moments that seem suspended between worlds. Reality feels dreamlike not because you are detaching from it, but because you are entering into a deeper dimension of perception. You are being invited into the symbolic realm, where nothing is literal and everything is layered with meaning. The rational mind resists this. It wants clarity, order, proof. But what is rising now is not rational, it is mythic. It comes not to be dissected but to be felt, experienced, and integrated. During this phase, dreams intensify. They are not random firings of neurons, but messages encoded in the language of archetypes. The same symbols may return night after night. A house you've never seen but feel you know. An animal following you. A body of water that changes color with your emotions. You may wake with a sense that something is trying to reach you. And it is. The psyche sends these images not to confuse but to initiate. To understand them is not to decode them intellectually, but to sit with them, feel into them, and allow their emotional resonance to shape your awareness. Synchronicity is another powerful signal at this stage. You may think of someone and they call. You may open a book at random and find a sentence that mirrors your internal struggle. You may see the same number over and over at clocks, receipts, and license plates, not because the number has magical power, but because the psyche has chosen it as a marker. These events are bridges between the inner and outer worlds. They are moments when meaning pierces the veil of ordinary life. And the more open you are to seeing them, the more frequently they appear, not because you are imagining them, but because you are becoming attuned to the symbolic language of the unconscious. These signals often come at the edges of consciousness, in liminal moments like just before sleep, just after waking, or during states of reverie. They slip past the filters of logic and land in the deeper self. You may be drawn to certain books, certain music, certain landscapes, without knowing why. You may walk into a space and feel a rush of emotion for no apparent reason. These are not meaningless reactions. They are clues, pulling you toward what needs to be remembered, reclaimed, or released. Emotionally, this stage may bring a strange mix of anticipation and disorientation. You sense something coming, but you don't know what. You feel excitement and dread in equal measure. The future feels near but unclear. This emotional ambiguity is part of the process. It is the psyche preparing you to loosen your grip on certainty. The upcoming shift cannot be predicted or controlled. It must be surrendered to. And surrender is the hardest thing for the ego, which thrives on planning, protecting, and preserving its identity. But surrender is the way the deeper self emerges, not through force, but through trust. In this liminal space, relationships also change. Some may fall away without conflict, as if the soul knows it must travel alone for a time. Others may deepen suddenly, sparked by a shared recognition of something timeless. You may begin to attract people who reflect your emerging self, mentors, kindred spirits, or those who carry messages you need to hear. These encounters feel charged, fated, significant. They are not random. They are echoes of your soul calling itself home through the lives of others. You may also find that your sense of identity becomes more fluid. You are no longer defined by your history, your roles, or your achievements. You feel yourself as something larger, as an unfolding process rather than a fixed persona. This can be liberating but also destabilizing. Who are you, if not the person you've always been? The psyche does not offer a quick answer. It offers a silence, a space in which a new identity can begin to form, not as an invention but as a discovery. And in that space, something ancient stirs. A memory not of the past but of potential. There is also a growing sensitivity to what lies beneath appearances. You sense energies in rooms, intentions behind words, truths behind masks. Your perception sharpens not because you are analyzing more, but because you are perceiving from a deeper level of being. The veil lifts. What once seemed superficial or irrelevant now feels essential. You are seeing through the eyes of the psyche, which cares not for social status or surface polish, but for resonance, meaning, and depth. All of this, the dreams, the synchronicities, the symbolic messages, are the psyche's way of drawing you into alignment with a greater pattern. Not a pattern imposed from outside, but one that has lived within you since the beginning. The shift that approaches is not just circumstantial, it is existential. The outer events are merely reflections of the inner awakening, and the signs that precede it are not instructions but invitations. They do not tell you what to do. They call you to listen, to notice, to follow the thread of meaning as it weaves through your experience like a secret path in the forest of your own becoming. When the psyche prepares you for a great transformation, it does not speak in the language of logic, nor does it offer guarantees or clarity. Instead, it stirs you from within, gently at first, then with increasing urgency, until the familiar becomes foreign and the ordinary begins to shimmer with strange significance. Everything you once depended upon for your sense of self starts to shift. Your desires no longer match your ambitions. Your values begin to change shape. The faces in your life reflect back questions you cannot yet answer. You find yourself caught between a world that no longer fits and a self that has not yet fully emerged. This space, sacred, uncomfortable, often painful, is not a detour from your path, it is the path. The signs that rise from the depths of the unconscious, the dissolution of meaning, the haunting silence, the symbols that appear with unnerving precision. These are the footprints of transformation. They do not come to punish, but to purify. They ask you to relinquish control, to loosen your grip on who you think you are, and to allow a deeper identity to be born. Real change does not begin with plans or resolutions. It begins with a rupture, a break in the rhythm of repetition. The Psyche reveals in whispers and waves what you are meant to outgrow, what you are meant to remember, and what you are being called to become. It strips you down not to destroy you, but to awaken you. You are being prepared, not for the life you expected, but for the life that is waiting on the other side of your willingness to evolve. To step into it, you must leave behind the comfort of certainty and walk through the unknown with reverence for the mystery that lives within you.